France and the rest of Europe are waking up to the possibility of the far right coming to power in one of the EU's founding members. Marine Le Pen's National Rally has taken the largest share of the vote with 33% in the first round of snap parliamentary elections in France. President Emmanuel Macron's centrists, here in yellow, trailed in third place with 20%, behind a left-wing alliance that pulled 28% of the vote. Macron is calling on voters to prevent the far right from winning a governing majority in next Sunday's decisive final round.
It's not only the result the far right were hoping for, but one they were sure they would get.
My dear compatriots, democracy has spoken, and the French have put the National Rally and its allies in the lead and practically wiped out Macron's bloc. In order to carry out the reforms that the country needs, we need an absolute majority so that Jordan Bardella is appointed Prime Minister by Emmanuel Macron.
Bardella, Marine Le Pen's protégé, was all smiles as he welcomed the results.
3 weeks after the European elections, which led to the call for these early elections, the French people have again delivered a resounding verdict and confirmed their clear desire for change.
From one end of the political spectrum to the other, a new far-left alliance in second place. They say they're the only alternative.
The country has to decide. Is it going to become more divided, increase social inequalities based on religion, skin color, social status, or where you come from? Or is it going to pull together and be one people that is going to work for the common good, unconditionally? That is the choice you have.
Not according to the governing Ensemble or Together party. France's Prime Minister issued his plea to the electorate.
Our objective is clear: to prevent the National Rally from getting an absolute majority in the second round, from dominating Parliament and therefore from governing the country with the nefarious plan it has in mind. I say this with all the force that this moment demands of each and every one of our voters. Not a single vote must go to the National Rally. In circumstances like these, France cannot afford to hesitate at all.
Voters cast their second ballots in a week, and President Macron will be hoping for a different outcome.
Our correspondent Sonia Falnica in Paris told me more about the outcome of this first round of voting.
Well, Terry, the big story here today in France are really those massive gains that the far right made in this first round of parliamentary elections, really improving on its historical score in recent European elections as well. The French media here today are calling it a shock. They're calling it an earthquake, urging voters to, set up now a barrage against the far right. And for President Macron, he called this snap election 3 weeks ago, hoping that the recent triumph of the far right in recent European elections, that would be just fleeting, that the opposite has happened. His gamble is now threatening not just to backfire, but is threatening to really upend the political order as we know it in France. Now, President Macron yesterday made a short speech and said, that he was urging all the voters to now rally behind a broad alliance. He said a broad Democratic Republican alliance to keep the far right out. But his centrist alliance has not made it clear whether this broad alliance will also include the far left France Unbowed Party, which is part of the alliance of parties on the left known as the Popular Front. They had a strong showing yesterday. And this is because members of this party have been accused of anti-Semitism. Its leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is a very provocative, divisive figure. So that still remains unclear.
DW's Sonia Falnica there in Paris. And for more on this, let's bring in Daniela Schwarzer. She's an expert on French politics and a member of the executive board of the Bertelsmann Foundation. Thanks for being with us this morning. First of all, the far right has won the first round of France's snap parliamentary elections. Has President Macron's plan backfired?
Well, I suppose he was expecting a very strong result for the Rassemblement National, for the far right, because all opinion polls showed that this would be the case, and I don't think he had any contradictory information, really. However, what was striking was the actual numbers of votes cast, not so much the percentage of 33%, but really the fact that over 11,500,000 people voted for the Rassemblement National, which is very strongly up from the last parliamentary elections, where the first round had a good 3 million voters, and also up from the European elections. So this was surely a surprise, and it's due to the very high voter mobilization. However, if his plan was not to defeat the Rassemblement National in the first round, but to possibly bring them into a position where they are in a minority but in government and really be demystified, because if they have to govern, they will have to take responsibility, and it's far more difficult to spread their ideas and their, in a way, propaganda without having any responsibility on the national level. That could then be a result which is positive, because what he eyes is the presidential elections 2027, where he wants to prevent Marine Le Pen, the candidate who already ran against him twice of the Rassemblement National, to actually win the presidential elections. But what he does need to avoid is, of course, a too strong result in the second round. And that's why he and other leaders have been calling on candidates to withdraw from the second round if they came in third. So there's one Republican Democratic candidate against a far-right candidate in each constituency.
So is that the plan then that he has now, the President Macron has now, for preventing the national rally from achieving all-out victory in next weekend's runoff? Because many see the momentum very much on their side.
Well, that seems to be definitely the plan after the second round of the elections. A number of party leaders, both from the conservative side of the spectrum, but also from the left side of the spectrum, and mostly there, have said they ask their candidates to withdraw. Some parties haven't done so, and that will be the question over the next 2 days, because it is until July 2nd in the evening that parties need to decide who stands in the second round and who doesn't. And so while, a number of leaders already said so last night, other parties have not expressed any plan yet. And so there is, of course, a danger that there will be 3 candidates in some constituencies, and that could then play to the benefit of the Rassemblement National. And we are very clearly heading for a strong result. But the main purpose at this point is to prevent an absolute majority for the far right.
Well, the far right could still win again in next weekend's runoff. If that happens, if they end up having to share power with President Macron, what kind of government would that be?
That would be a so-called cohabitation, which basically means there is one president from a certain party and a prime minister from another party who can then compose his government. In this case, in your scenario with the Rassemblement National coming out strongest, possibly with an absolute majority, then it would very likely be Mr. Bardella, who is a very young campaigner, party chair, who has led a successful European elections campaign and now has scored very well for his party in the first round of the elections. And this party would then be on this government would then be on many issues in outright contradiction with President Macron.
Exactly.
So there is a likelihood that there is political paralysis, infighting between president and government on key issues. The president has strong power on foreign and security policy, so he would guard that area for himself. But on many other issues, including some European questions which have an internal dimension, the prime minister has a strong role to play. So there would be conflict and possibly paralysis in the French political leadership.
Daniela, thanks for taking time to talk with us today. That was political scientist Daniela Schwarzer.
Thank you very much for having me.